This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. Hello and welcome to Exvangelical. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. This week's guest is Alice Connor. Alice is the author of the book Fierce: Women of the Bible and Their Stories of Violence, Mercy, Bravery, Wisdom, Sex, and Salvation. In this conversation, Alice and I start off talking a little bit about her background and then move quickly into nerding out about the Episcopal Church before launching headlong into a discussion of the women of the Bible that she profiled for her book. This is a great discussion that covers a ton of ground, and I can't wait for you to hear it. As always, you can support the show via Patreon at patreon.com/exvangelicalpod, and also by rating and reviewing the show on iTunes. I can't stress that last one enough. Please, if you do enjoy the show, please go and rate it on iTunes. It helps more people find the show, and you all, the audience, are the marketing department here for Exvangelical. So any of those ratings and reviews will help boost the show's visibility, and I would just love it if you took a moment to do that at some point during your day. Also, if you'd like to join the Exvangelical Facebook group, just search for Exvangelical on Facebook. If you have any trouble finding it, you can let me know on Twitter. I'm at BRChastain on there. You can either mention me or DM me. I'll get you hooked up and get you in there if you are unable to find the Facebook group for whatever reason. I have changed the settings a little bit, so you should be able to see it, no problem. I did get a report from a couple people that had trouble finding it, but please, if you do have any trouble, just reach out and let me know, and I'll help you get plugged in there. Also, this past week, I launched a separate feed called EXV Extras, which can also be subscribed to separately in iTunes. This feed will include some shorter, more informal, and more experimental content that I've begun exploring on Anchor, which is an app I've mentioned at the top of a couple of other episodes. If you use Anchor, you can still find the show there by searching for EXV Extras on the Anchor app, but otherwise you can subscribe directly in iTunes. I was on vacation last week, and I didn't have my recording equipment, so I went ahead and recorded a quick episode on Anchor last week and released it relative to Independence Day, etc. So you can find that there, and on Anchor, as well as on the iTunes and Google Play stores under the title EXV Extras. All right, everybody, I'm back from vacation and ready to get back to sharing great conversations with you. Let's get into this conversation here with Alice Connor. Hey everybody, welcome back to Exvangelical. This week I have with me Alice Connor. She is the author of the book Fierce: Women of the Bible and Their Stories of Violence, Mercy, Bravery, Wisdom, Sex, and Salvation. Thank you very much for joining the show, Alice.
Hey guys, how are you, Blake?
I'm doing great. I'm really glad we were able to connect you. You were able to send a copy of the book, and I absolutely loved it. So I'm really happy to be able to talk to you a little bit about it. But before we get to that, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about you too. So
sure.
Let's just start just with your background, where you grew up, all that sort of fun stuff.
Sure. I grew up in a lot of places. My father is a priest, and my mother, actually both my parents have PhDs in theater, and but she was sort of getting various degrees as I was growing up. So we would move to one place for a church, and then she would get a degree because they wanted her to whatever. And so then we'd move to a new place for her to get a job. So he would get a new job, and then we moved. So I moved around a lot is the upshot of that story. I was born in Oregon, lived in Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina, I think maybe a little bit in Indiana, and now Ohio. So I'm from everywhere.
That's great. So so what denomination was your father a priest in?
He still is. He's retired.
Okay.
But he and I are both priests in the Episcopal Church, which is the American version of the Church of England.
Mm-hmm. And what was that sort of church environment like growing up? I have just recently started to attend Episcopal services. So
Mm-hmm,
that's
mm-hmm.
very. I initially grew up Methodist, so it was like a
Uh-huh.
pared down version of
Sure, sure.
of
Fallen
Episcopalianism. So
Episcopalians, we call you.
yeah, yeah.
No, we don't really call you that.
Our guy was booted. So
Yes, he was a little bit, kind of like Martin Luther.
yeah.
Yeah, no, the Episcopal Church is what we call a liturgical church. Liturgy meaning the work of the people, but on the ground, what that means is sort of a more formal order to the worship service on a Sunday morning. Certainly, it has particular elements that are repeated in the same order each week, though the same could be said for a lot of evangelical churches, certainly that I've been to. They wouldn't identify themselves as a liturgical church, but it still has the same elements.
Yeah.
Liturgical just means, well, it means what I just said it means. So certain things in a set order, which are sort of led by the people, even though it looks like it's led by the clergy up front in our fancy robes or whatever. Like I said, on the ground, it tends to look more formal, tends to look a little bit fancier, that sort of thing. And I really love that, actually. I really appreciate, as a preacher, the lectionary, which is something that liturgical churches use, which is a 3-year cycle through Scripture. The idea is that if you go to church every Sunday over 3 years, you will basically hear all the Bible. There's big chunks missing from it, as I mentioned in my book. But you basically get sort of the main story in 3 years. And I appreciate that as a preacher, because if it were up to me to choose what I was preaching on each week, they would be like, it's always Micah 6:8, or it's Jacob wrestling the angel, or it's something nice and fluffy from the New Testament, right? Like, that's not helpful. I appreciate the challenge that offers me. And honestly, that's what I appreciate about the liturgy itself, is the challenge of it. So that wasn't your question, though.
That's all really good. And I'm really, because I'm such a, I'm reaching neophyte, like a neophyte into that sort of type of tradition. It's very interesting to me to understand and learn bit by bit what goes into all that, because there is a lot of there's a lot of thought that has gone into the liturgy that
and a lot of history.
And
it's not just that we're making it up and thinking about it each week. It's that, like, the form of that worship has really been around since the beginning of the church.
Right.
If you look at the Didache, which is the earliest very small document about early Christians that we have, it lays out the order of service, what the new Christians are supposed to be doing in their house churches, and it's what we do. We may have expanded on it here and there and made it more formal in various places, but we've been doing this for 2,000 years, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that connection to the history.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, what was it like growing up? I mean, I guess my answer might be similar to people in any tradition. I mean, it was what I grew up in, so I didn't really know any different, right? But and I had a particular experience because my dad was the priest, so I would be mentioned in sermons periodically, and we had to sit we didn't have to, but we often sat in the front row, and that kind of stuff. I loved it.
Yeah, that's good. So you liked so you liked being a PK too, and as far as all, I mean, I know that has. So I'm married to a PK, so I know that's like and one of my best friends is a PK. Like, I know that's a loaded thing. Like, you have a very unique and particular view on the world, and and the experience of being a PK in a church is like you're like a participant and an observer. Like, it's this weird thing.
Well, and everybody knows you. I mean, everybody knows who you are. And you don't necessarily know who everybody else is.
And you're like an extension of your parents in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's probably true for a lot of people in different situations. But I mean, perhaps more than other people, we were seen as extensions of our parents. And I don't have any memory of anybody judging my parents because of our behavior. But I'm not sure my parents would have told me that at the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I I just loved the Episcopal Church growing up. It's just I'm not saying that I always loved being there.
That's another thing.
Definitely, I still don't really care for getting up early on a Sunday morning for church. It's not my favorite thing. I'd rather have church at night. But so as a child, I'm sure I rebelled against that. There were lots of bits of church that I didn't care for. Interestingly, part of this liturgical church experience is that you tend to have the same prayers over and over, week after week. The Eucharistic prayer, the consecration prayer for the bread and wine, is one that we have 4 of them, and they get sort of cycled through. And they're called Eucharistic prayers A, B, C, and D. And I was just talking to my bishop a few months ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I've been working for Lutherans for 8 years now, and I love them. They're amazing. God, I miss Eucharistic prayer A. I never thought I would say that. Like I do, though. Anyway.
Yeah, I mentioned we've been going to an Episcopal church recently, and we went to a small group, and one of the attendees was a professor of liturgy, I think. So he rattled off a couple of those prayers like by memory.
Right.
Like he knew what which prayer referred to what. Like
yeah. Well, I mean,
pretty...
I probably could do that if given a little bit of time. Again, 8 years out of the tradition makes you forget things, but
yeah.
But you put me back in an Episcopal church and I can say it word for word. So
sure.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the beauty of it, right? It's that it doesn't change very often. And so when you hear those words again, because you have heard them so often, there's like this immediate deep drop into a deeper space of contemplation and of prayer.
Yeah.
It's like suddenly you settle back in and go, oh yeah, right. This is what this place is. Okay, I'm there.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And
I love that.
I think that there's something, if you're, I remember like I had some friends that were, that when I went to my evangelical youth group, like it attracted some kids that were Catholic, that went to Catholic church, but maybe like their Catholic church may not have had a youth group or what have you.
Right.
And like I moved from a small town in Indiana where there are very few Catholics to Chicagoland area, which has a ton. But what I learned is that, Catholics and Episcopalians and all these other high church groups follow lectionaries, and like you can walk into, and there are all these common practices, and you can literally walk into a church anywhere in the world, and like you'll know the rituals. You won't feel necessarily lost, like within the service or that sort of thing, and that was like when I first learned that was kind of enviable. Like there like certain, even moving within the Methodist Church from like a small town conservative one to a suburban, more loose or modern service, like there weren't any of those markers, which just like sort of compare and contrast, it's definitely like thinking now as an adult and the sorts of things that you sort of want to be able to have a sense of familiarity. That's a valuable thing.
It is. It's funny that you say that because I just came back a few weeks ago from a pilgrimage with some of my students, and we went to Germany and France. And the first full day that we were in Munich, it was a Sunday, so we found a church that was right near our hotel. And none of us know German. I have 3 students who are studying German, and none of them were on the trip with us. And so we went to this church. No idea even what the tradition of this church was. And so we walk in, beautiful space, just gorgeous sanctuary. Sat down. We were like a minute late, unfortunately, but we sat down in the back, and of course, it's all in German. I mean, obviously, it's Germany.
Yeah.
And we sat there and we're like, I'm not sure how long we're going to stay because we don't know what's going on, but we did know what was going on. I mean, we didn't know the specifics of the words.
Yeah.
but because of that flow of the liturgy, we knew exactly what was going on. Oh, this is the Old Testament reading. This is the New Testament reading. This is the Psalm. This is the Gospel. Now he's preaching, possibly about fish. We weren't really sure. And we got to the prayers and the Eucharist. I mean, it was like we know exactly what's going on here, and we don't actually have to know the language to be worshiping.
Yeah,
and to know what's coming.
Yeah, which I think for a lot of, maybe historically, people thought that it would be good that was too conformist, but I feel like we've cycled back where that part of that comfort, that's like a comfort now that allows you to do your own thing, which it's just to me, again, it's just like I'm a neophyte, so it's like it's very interesting.
Right. When you started going to this Episcopal church, have you been doing like newcomer classes or confirmation classes or anything like that, like to get a sense of what's going on?
We went to what was like a pre-Lenten retreat, and so our rector, she did what was sort of like a guided Eucharist. So she sort of broke down what it means when things like passing the peace, and the what that means is like, and this was shortly after the election, so she was emphasizing like when I say peace, it means like it doesn't matter that we disagree on this thing.
Right. Yeah.
And like this peace, it extends beyond that. And like she's very much, she's getting her demon, like she's studying like the catechumenate and all these different things that are really cool. And she's very open and very helpful in telling you this sort of instruction and what that all is supposed to, what it represents. So sort of in where I am personally, like that's been really, really wonderful.
That's great. Yeah.
So because it really helps to have that sort of presence, especially when you're new to something. So
for sure.
Yeah. So we're very fortunate in that regard.
I was wondering because one of the, and obviously this is oversimplifying, but one of the ways we talk about the Episcopal Church is that we are about common practice, not common belief. Thus, you might read the Nicene Creed or the Eucharistic prayer or anything, and kind of everybody in the room is going to have kind of a different experience of what that means and what it's calling them to and all that kind of stuff. But we're all there for doing the same thing. And similarly, across the world, we all followed this same order, and many of the prayers are the same across countries, and it's the practice, being present and practicing the faith. Excuse me. That similarity is what ties us together, even if we, put three liberals in a room, or three conservatives in a room, doesn't matter. They're all going to disagree with each other about something.
Right. Yeah.
So we just sort of recognize that and say, that's just who we are as human beings. What ties us together is our common practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is a huge sort of insight of the Episcopal Church, really. Because
I love how this is becoming a marketing podcast for the Episcopal Church USA.
Yeah, this is just
Y'all should all check it out. It's great.
This is. I haven't really talked about this on the show really, as far as like my sort of my sort of experience of sort of where I am right now, and the fact that I'm even attending church, like. But anyways, like I do think for me it's part of a formative thing, a sort of healing thing to be in a sort of environment that does allow that. Because the church we went to before, I mean, it was much more about sort of policing your beliefs. Like you better stay in line. Like we left because we were egalitarian. Like all this, all this stuff. Anyways, like it's been really wonderful to be in a place that allows that, and I think that speaks primarily to the community and where we are. Like, I'm not going to prescribe that for everyone.
No,
certainly not. Like everybody's got their own thing. Everybody's in a different place, and the whole thrust of this show is is that, you know,
Yeah.
you're okay wherever you are.
Yeah. Jesus met people on the way. That was
Yeah.
his whole shtick. So yeah.
Yeah. And even if the word Jesus triggers you right now, then like
Mm.
don't mess with it. Like
Right. Right.
it's
Right.
fine. But one thing I did want to mention about that sort of common belief that I think is, or common practice is, something that I actually read in the book. I'm gonna butcher his name because I get it wrong every time. Living Buddha, Living Christ by Thich Nhat Hanh, I think.
Oh
is what
yeah.
it
Yeah.
is.
It's great.
Yeah, he talks about like he talks about, and he's a Buddhist, and he recognized that there's a lot of common practice between the Buddhist tradition and the Christian tradition. And in one of the final chapters, and one of the two main things I took away is he says mindfulness is the Holy Spirit. And that's one thing he
Yes.
says, and then the other is that to not like necessarily chain yourself to a belief, because your beliefs will change, but if you maintain your practice, then the practice
Yes.
is what becomes formative.
Yes.
And that is like, for if you come from a background that emphasizes beliefs, that's like that shifts everything. And that turns everything on its head, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's more consistent with human experience. So here we are.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. I was
Yeah.
just thinking that I have a couple students who are neuroscientists, and they would say that's exactly what the neuroscience is.
Yeah.
Is that our practices shape us. Our practices shape our beliefs.
Right. Yeah. Which
Yeah.
is, you know, in such a polarizing world where everything's about your belief, especially like politically now in the climate we're in, it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
you got to wear your beliefs on your sleeve and all this other stuff.
Right.
But anyways, so you, just to get back a little bit to your biography and part
Yeah.
of that, just to sort of get work our way up to your book and everything. So you enjoyed. You said you were a church nerd. You just
Yes.
liked. And when I look to the side here, I'm looking at my notes. Just FYI.
Yeah, that's fine.
You enjoyed church. Did you go to college and that sort of stuff with the intent of studying theology, or was
Absolutely
this okay? It was.
No, I mean, I felt a little bit of a call to seminary when I was in high school, but I mean, who wants that job? That's horrible. I don't want that. I'm a fabulous, free, strong woman. I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to do. So I have a theater degree. I'm a costumer, and particularly, and I have a minors in English and studio art, mostly ceramics and art history. But yeah, no, I did not want to do that. But by the time I graduated from college, I was kind of burned out on the theater. I realized that it was very political, and you can even take away the political part of it. It was very much based on who you knew. If you wanted a job somewhere, you had to know somebody who would get you a job. And that was exhausting to me.
Yeah.
Not that I'm a pretty extroverted person, but I wanted to be hired for being good at it,
Right.
not for who I knew. Right. Anyway, I was exhausted by it. And so I was like, nope, not doing that anymore. And so my fiance at the time and I moved, cause I got a job at a big fancy Joann store, where my parents lived, and, they were paying me some ridiculous amount of money, which that's a whole other story. But anyway, and so we moved up there, and I had this job, and fairly soon I sort of realized I don't want to be a costumer. I'm not sure what I want to do. And this call came back. I was like, oh shit. Okay. So I chose to go to this Episcopal. I mean, I never really gave up the Episcopal Church. I always loved it. And so I chose to start going to this church that was on campus at OSU, St. Stephen's Episcopal. And it was the first church that I chose to go to myself, really. Like I said, I'm going to go to this place. And probably second or third Sunday I was there, I stood up at the announcements. They're very casual. They're very liturgical, but very casual as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I stood up at the announcements and said, hey, I think I want to go to seminary, and I'm new, so we should get to know each other. They were very kind and loving, and they shepherded me through the process, and here I am.
Wow. Yeah. So
I'm honestly not sure if it had been Well, I mean, that's probably true for everybody. I was going to say, I'm honestly not sure this would have happened if anything had been different, right? If I'd gone to a different church, if we'd had a different bishop at the time, I mean, anything could have changed this.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, all that stuff that could be happenstance or,
Right.
Absolutely. So after seminary, you've been in ministry basically ever since? Like that's just been okay. Yeah.
No, I was at a church. I live in Cincinnati, and I was at a big Episcopal church, what we call a cardinal parish. It means they're well resourced, but also, I don't know, historical. I don't even know why I brought that up. Anyway, I worked at this church as a youth minister for 4 years, and they really formed me from being a baby priest to, I don't know, an adolescent priest anyway. If not sort of, to extend the metaphor, maybe a college-age priest. I don't know. I mean, I was in my 20s. But, kind of they really shaped me and formed me into being who I am. I mean, everything does, but they really stuck with me and taught me how to do this. And then I had my first baby, and I went to change to campus ministry, and I've been there for 8 years. And it's great. It's with Lutherans who I adore. So,
Great. Yeah, that's cool. So let's actually, if you don't mind, let's just start diving into your book. There's a lot.
No, we will not talk about that. I'm kidding. Yes, of course we'll talk about the book.
Yeah. So I just, like I said, I really enjoyed your book. I want to sort of I want to talk about a few of them. The way you have this book structured is each chapter is dedicated or focused on at least usually one or two one or two women.
Yeah.
And the book is explicitly just all about the women in the Bible, and I think it just to preface it a little bit, the way your prose is very honest. Your prose is very very casual in a lot of ways, and also just very but I just really like this book. It's really hard for me to even just articulate it. And
thank you.
Yeah. So I really do just one of the sort of themes that I thought we could kind of focus on throughout these stories. And I'm not going to force a theme. So you know these stories much better than I do. You're the one that wrote the book on it.
No apologies.
But a couple of the things that really stick out to me throughout these stories is women finding a way to exert power and exert their own agency within systems that were against them, and also how they did that within sort of the scope of justice. So in particular, stories like Susanna and others, and I do want to start with some of the Tamar, actually. Am I saying that right, Tamar?
Yeah.
Because I think that's a very interesting example of a woman that she was credited righteousness for something that seems a little ethically slippery.
Right.
So
right.
I'd love to hear you sort of hear you talk about it. What you take away from her story.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say it that way because she brings up for me sort of how we talk about saints in the church. You probably often hear people say, "Oh, they have the patience of a saint," or "Oh, you're just a saint." And I think about the stories of the saints that I've heard, and some of them are like that. A lot of them really aren't. Like a lot of them are kind of douchey.
Yeah.
They're just not necessarily nice people, and that's perhaps a side note or a rabbit trail, is that a lot of Christians, a lot of us believe that being a good Christian is about being nice.
Yeah.
And certainly a lot of people outside the church think that's what we're supposed to be.
Like Ned Flanders. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And And so then they get frustrated when we're not. That's complicated. Just like I said, it's a side note. We're not called to be nice, right? We're called to be faithful. And sometimes being called to be faithful can look rude or odd, right? Anyway, so when you say somebody has the patience of a saint, it's like, well, but which saint are you talking about? I mean, St. Augustine, like which part of his life are you speaking of, right? St. Thomas Aquinas, whatever.
Yeah.
Martin Luther isn't a saint. He was really anti-Semitic. I'm sorry, Lutheran friends, but like,
oh yeah.
He's really great in a lot of ways. And in other ways, like, oh my God, dude, no.
And he hated poor people.
Of your time, and I wish you hadn't. Anyway.
Yeah. He hated poor people too.
Right, exactly. So for Tamar, I guess it's not even, there's the specific, sorry, I've lost my language all of a sudden. For Tamar, there's the specificity of her story. Like this is about her, right? She's got this kind of odd story, but it's not just her. There's lots of people in Scripture and lots of us who have these lives that are more complex than just good and evil. Mm-hmm. Right? That's those categories are too simple to encompass what our lives are actually like. So for Tamar, her whole thing is that she was married to two different sons of Judah. Yes, that Judah. And each one died while she was married to them. And so Judah was like, I'm not marrying her to a third son. Like, clearly something's going wrong here. She may not be killing him, but my sons are dying. So nope. Which makes sense, right? Like, except that, according to their law, she was entitled to marry the next brother. And in addition to that, at the time, a woman's worth was only based on the number of male children she could create. If she's not married to anybody, she is worth nothing. So she's in this liminal space where she has no worth, no value. She is, in fact, a burden on her family because she had to go back home to them. And she's waiting to be married to the next son because he's too young. And she, at the time, didn't know that Judah had said she couldn't marry him. But eventually, the son is old enough. She's not married to him. And she's like, what the hell, dude? And she knows what is just in this situation. She knows both legally what is just, but also sort of existentially what is just. She is owed this husband. And so she dresses up as a prostitute, which is the part that we find kind of awkward. Actually, that's part one of what we find to be awkward. She dresses up as a prostitute. And she seduces her father-in-law, who apparently doesn't recognize her, Judah. And it's a fantastic story. It's like sort of one of these like legal mumbo jumbo things. Like he says, "Oh, I'll give you a sheep, but I don't have it right now." And she's like, "Okay, well you got to give me some sort of collateral." He's like, "All right, well I'll give you my like staff and my cord. That's like my driver's license, my passport." She's like, "Great, I'll take those." They have sex. She leaves. He does the right, quote unquote, right thing. He sends the sheep back, or goat, or whatever it is. And the people in the town say, there's never been a prostitute at that gate. We don't know what you're talking about. So that's awkward for him. I was like, all right, well, that was weird. Whatever. But then, horrors, his daughter-in-law is pregnant, but she's not married to anyone. How could this be? She must be stoned. So he calls to have her stoned. And she's like, great, fine. Want to know who the dad is? And he's like, yeah, I do. That's terrible. He's going to be stoned too. And she's like, great. These are his. He's like, oh, shit. And then, and this is key, he says, not, we're still going to stone you. You are awful. Women must keep silence, etc. He says, she is more righteous than I. And she is in the genealogy of Jesus. Her child is in the genealogy of Jesus. So that whole story, it's so awkward, so weird.
Yeah.
So according to sort of simple Christian modern standards, sinful. And yet righteousness is found in the midst of it. Like, in a lot of ways, that's, in a nutshell, what Scripture is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, Again, that's what's so refreshing about your book and the way, when I said casual, it's really what I meant by that is like your lines like perpetual version, my
Yeah.
ass, things like
Right,
that.
right, right.
Like,
It's conversational.
yes, it's definitely conversational. But the other thing that I absolutely love, and this is clear in the way you represent the story, is that these people are full-fledged people. Like
Yeah.
there's not the sort of the spectrum, the binary of angel or harlot. Like
Right. Yeah.
there's just a mixed up man or woman made out of clay. Like
Right.
you're
Yeah.
not. And to me that sort of humanity is something that somehow, at least in like our American context, we definitely sort of lost track of, like the
Yeah.
humanity in these stories. Like they're sort
Yeah.
of dead on the page, and
Right.
the way in which you retell them and you explore them like livens them up because that I mean, this woman was completely disenfranchised within the
Yeah.
like power and legal and moral and family systems of the ancient
Yeah.
Near East. What's she gonna do? And
Right.
so
Right.
she
Yeah.
didn't-
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, her story is I felt was very indicative of all these different places that people can fall through the cracks. Like she fell through
Yeah.
lots, and then she found a way.
Yeah.
She was clever, and she found a way to leverage that.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that like within her story, she fell through those cracks. And even though we have this extended story in the book of Genesis about her that various authors have kept over the years, right? Like we had it as oral tradition, we had it as written down story, we had it through revisions. Like this story has stayed, and it's in Jesus' genealogy in Matthew, or not that story, but she's listed there, right? Like so, we've got two citations of this that people thought this was important, but we don't read this story. She's fallen through the cracks again. Like, why?
Yeah.
Like, literally, the scripture that we hold so highly holds her up as an example, holds her up as someone to remember. And we don't remember it. And if I sound angry right now, it's because I am. I'm often angry. But, like, I'm particularly angry about this. Like, I'm not even reading, in this particular story, I'm not even reading between the lines. Like, it literally says she's more righteous than Judah.
Right.
And she's literally in Jesus' genealogy. Something is important there.
Yeah.
And her story is not part of our lectionary. It's not part of most Bible studies for women. And who cares even if it's for women or not? It's not part of
Right.
most Bible studies.
Yeah.
People just don't know this story, men
Yeah.
or women.
Yeah. If we can talk about Ehud killing a fat guy with like
Right, which is a hilarious story. But like, what does that tell you? Don't be fat. Don't sit on the potty. I don't understand this story. It's more complex there too. But
yeah.
it's a
Yeah,
very strange story.
people know that story though. They don't necessarily recall this woman that's in the genealogy of Jesus, which is
Right.
the
And-
injustice.
I mean, I wonder if one of the reasons that we don't remember these stories, and I'm possibly making this up on the spot, is that maybe. Okay, I'm literally thinking out loud. I am an extrovert. I shape my thoughts outside of my body, so I'm doing this right.
That's totally okay.
I'm saying this. I'm not sure if it's entirely true, but I'm going to say this, and I'd be interested to hear what your listeners have to say about this. I wonder if a lot of these stories we have, on some level, chosen not to remember, consciously or unconsciously, because many of the women's stories are more difficult, more. Well, I was going to say more messy, but then I think about like Noah's daughters having sex with him. Is that right? No, that's not Noah. Sorry, that was Lot.
Yeah.
Lot's daughters having sex with him after the destruction of Sodom, and like, what? Which is, well, that's messy, except that then their children are like, quote unquote, the bad guys after that. So that's not as messy. All right, I really am forming this thought right now.
Yeah. No, but
I'm thinking about all the women I've written about and the ones that I didn't write about and how complex their stories are. And sort of like Tamar, they're not all the same, obviously, but like Tamar, you've got a situation that is on a lot of levels kind of morally impure or morally awkward, at least, but is still somehow represented as positive.
Yeah. I think the thing that just having been your reader, the thing that I gathered from these stories is that in many ways they were forced to be impure. Like it was not necessarily the thing in their heart that made them want to be evil or whatever, or to do malicious things. It was the fact that they were dealt a shitty hand.
It's a situation. What do I do with this thing that I'm existing in now? Yeah.
Right. Like, so one of the next ones is Hagar. You know, she was in another position where she, it wasn't just male. It wasn't just male female. It was also a subservient level. Like it was I can't remember. Is she a servant or was she a slave?
Well, it depends on your translation, I think.
Yeah. And how she was serving both Abraham and Sarah, and you know, and then there's this whole dynamic with Sarah and all of this stuff, and again, like you emphasize that this woman is in a position that is not very enviable. Like she's in a sort of shitty position, and then, but then as you mentioned, she gives a name to God, and I mean, who among us has done that?
Yeah,
and it's
nobody else in Scripture. Yeah, she was hard to write about too. Like actually, when I've read that chapter aloud, which is not that often, the bit where she's out in the wilderness, I think it's the second time, when she's been kicked out of her family, she's carrying. It's awkward because her son at that point, according to the text, would have been a lot older, but you get the sense that he's small. She's like carrying her baby or her toddler, and she's been given a skin of water. And I said something like, you know, she's walking through this desert, the despair creeping in, and holding her son and holding this water, the one getting heavier as the other gets lighter. And just how awful that is. I mean, for any of us to contemplate the imminent death of our child and our own, I mean, it doesn't have to be the child, just our own mortality, and how, honestly, how many people are experiencing that right now. Like this is not a story that exists only in our Scripture. It has been kept, and it speaks to us because we see it every day. Like, think about the people leaving Syria, the people who have left Syria. I mean, all those pictures that we saw in the news of children washing up on the shore and the overloaded boats. I mean, they are the Hagar of 2017. It just breaks your heart.
Yeah.
And so what do we do with it, right? Like, she was dealt a particular hand and she had to do something with it. We are dealt a particular hand individually, but also as a culture. Like, this is what we have. What do we make of it?
Yeah.
I don't have an answer.
I don't have an answer either. Just let that be a pregnant pause there. Like, it's just gonna. Yeah, absolutely.
Change things, but with their suspect lives, we look the other way. Are you really that pure, sir? Thought I saw you in Vegas. It was not pretty, but she was. But she would wake up wealthy, and you will wake up 45, and she will wake up with a baby. There, but for the grace of God go I.
Well, again, sort of one of the other aspects that you have here within some of the stories is this sense of erasure or people being forgotten, or not being emphasized. However you want to. However, all those different phrases have different connotations, but they sort of point to the same thing, where a woman's story has been de-emphasized for something else, or has been forgotten on purpose or from neglect. And that sort of comes to the forefront in the story. In a chapter you have about Asherah, which I think is interesting for a number of reasons. I first of all, I know like very little about how that factors into, factors into like the mythology and ancient Near East belief that sort of formed early Judaism and everything. There's that, but then there's also how that applies to, and the implications that has for Judaism and Christianity now. So I'd love to just hear you sort of talk a little bit about, and actually give some background as to who Asherah is, what this goddess represented, and really what the eventual sort of erasure or, someone or her being retconned, like to use a comic book term, like she was retconned, just like Hal Jordan didn't kill everybody in 0 Hour. That was Parallax.
Yes. That was nice.
That was Parallax, okay?
Oh my God. I have got to tell my husband that you said that. He's going to be so excited.
Yeah.
And not Paranax, that's a whole different person. Anyway, Asherah is a really interesting character, and I recall, I think this is one of the people that my Old Testament professor in seminary said, you can't, this is not something you can talk about with your parishioners because they'll freak out. And she would say that a lot, and I was like, I love you. Why would you say that? Why wouldn't I talk to my parishioners about this? Why are we going to seminary if not to share this information?
Yeah.
This is crazy. And I get why Asherah is awkward. It's really interesting to me how many people have really been attracted to this chapter, because her whole presence in Scripture is really one of absence. That's sort of the point of her in a lot of ways. Essentially, like a lot of religions, but certainly in the ancient Near East, the folks in that area started out as polytheists, so multiple gods, household gods, etc. And they moved through a phase called henotheism, which means there's still lots of gods, but ours is the best one. And that's essentially a lot of the early Hebrew scriptures is the henotheistic era as it's moving into monotheism / is revised by the people who became monotheists. So that's sort of the point, is that she was there. In fact, still is there. Depending on your translation, it may say Asherah or it may say the Asherahs, like Gideon and various people are commanded to cut down the Asherahs. Or if you see something like the sacred poles, that's usually her. It was either poles or it was like sacred groves of trees. It was very sort of earth-centric religion. And it's not just, she was some, heathen pagan goddess. She was worshipped alongside of Yahweh. There's some historical evidence that she was sort of Yahweh's wife, or at least consort. I mean, gods didn't really get married so much; they just had sex and made the world, kind of thing. Yeah. So she's very much in that school of things, right? If you look at Greek mythology and you think of like Gaia, and is it Gaia and Uranus?
Yeah, Uranus.
Boy, it's been a long time since I studied that. It's similar stuff. Or in Egyptian mythology, I think it's Isis and what's his face. Not the point. The point is that you've got this like super ancient form of the way the earth is created and how the gods interact with each other. And in the ancient Near East, and specifically in this sort of proto-Israelite culture, there was this goddess called Asherah, and she was called lots of things, Astarte and all kinds of things like that. But later, as they moved into monotheism, there was this, oh, no, we didn't actually worship her. No. She was a false god. She was the god of the people who are not us. And all of our heroes actually got rid of all that stuff. It's some of it is so it's a dual narrative. Some of it is we are very righteous, so we're getting rid of all that worship of false gods, and the other part of it is oh no, we never worshipped her in the first place. Well, you can't have both. One of them. Anyway, so her story, and I do say this near the end of the chapter. I'm not like writing this chapter in such a way that we should bring back the worship of Asherah. She's pretty cool, but she also like demanded child sacrifice. Maybe Yahweh did too. Anyway, we'll gloss over that for a second and just say I'm not asking for bringing that back. I'm saying her story suggests to us in a way that is really visceral. We erase stories all the time. We erase people all the time. And why do we do that? What is our motivation? What is frightening about them? What is threatening? What about her story translates into 2017, which is true for all these chapters, but her specifically, why are we erasing people?
Yeah, and I think your examples of that erasure are very evocative. You talk about Stonewall, and you talk about Henrietta Lacks, and a number of other people that were erased or forgotten, So that is a very evocative thing, and I think it does pique people's interest because of that sort of otherness, I guess. But yeah, that whole sense of, I think maybe just not being courageous enough to face your own history,
right?
Which we're sort of confronted with all the time now.
We are, and yet we live in a culture and in a technological world where everything is so fast that fact checkers can't keep up with the next thing.
Yeah.
Right. So we can look back and say, oh, this happened and that happened, and we've already moved 6 cycles beyond that.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. Things get erased all the time, even if we have clear evidence that they were real.
Right. That's, yeah.
There's
too, yeah. Yeah. There's too many examples of that too. You're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about your book. It just makes you, makes you just think about any number of things. Mm-hmm. So just just compels you to contemplate on all sorts of different things.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my hope. I've had people say to me before after I've preached, I wanted you to say more. I wanted more, like you ended before you answered all my questions. I'm like, I wasn't intending to answer your questions.
Right.
I was intending to encourage you to ask different questions.
Yeah.
And sort of that's how I feel about this book as well is, I don't need people to agree with me. I say that in the introduction. It's okay, dear listeners to Exvangelical. If and when you buy this book or borrow it from a friend or whatever and read it, I don't expect you to agree with every interpretation that I have made of these women. But I do hope that it will invite you to read these stories with the question, what is another way I could look at this? Mm-hmm. Which I think is important, not just for Scripture. I think Scripture is obviously the basis of a lot of our faith, but I think this is really important politically. I think this is important, in sort of the larger theological sense. I think this is important interpersonally, that we tend to fall into scripts. We tend to fall into patterns of behavior, patterns of understanding. I think this is how you are, therefore that's how you are, instead of being curious, right? Not defensive, right, but curious. How else could I imagine this? Mm-hmm. Right? Doesn't mean that the how else is the way. There is no one way. There's lots of ways. Right. But that requires you to realize that your way, my way, is not the only way either.
Yeah.
And that's hugely important for compassion and empathy.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's definitely the driving force of this show is that it's more about hearing someone's story, like actually hearing it.
Yeah.
Instead of and letting someone be descriptive of their own experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's the only way you can become compassionate or like understand someone. Yeah, I'm in rousing agreement with you. Like, you know, so I'm not. Yeah, there's nothing to debate there, in my opinion.
I can bring some stuff up to debate if you need.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'll definitely still ask you questions. I don't know if I'm going to disagree with them or have that sort of conversation with you. One of the things that I haven't really addressed is that we've talked more about sort of the gender politics of some of this, as well as in Tamar and Hagar. There's also a number of things about sexual behavior and sexual politics and all that sort of stuff, and how it was supposed to be the sort of high standards that they may have had even back then, even if their own practices never, matched with their actual standards. But then throughout the book, the other thing that I mentioned earlier about you having just full-fledged people is that you don't do. I think at one point when you talk about Ruth with Boaz, you mention the Breakfast at Tiffany's fade out.
Yes.
Like you know what happened after that.
You know what happened there.
But in this you like, I think some writers, especially with books like this, their whole text may be the fade out. Like there might be just innuendo. But you talk about the fact that these women have their own sexual agency, and also at the same time are threatened sexually. And that's present in a lot of different chapters, or one of them being Susanna, where it literally is a legal trial, about being accusations of rape, essentially, and accusations of a woman being unfaithful. So, I mean, there's so many different avenues and different ways to approach this particular topic within your text, from Song of Songs or from Susanna, or from really pretty much any element of a chapter, because that is integral to both men and women. So why wouldn't it belong?
Right.
I just kind of want to leave it up to you and let you sort of explore. I think Susanna is a great example of this, but then it's also a sort of hostile example of it because of that. But then Song of Songs is more of the celebration of it, as well as Ruth, which I think people are finally starting to understand the more explicit nature of that book. Before it was very romanticized, but now it's romantic, but it's just a little more realistically romantic.
Right.
So anyways, that's
I
definitely want to just hear you sort of explore that a little bit, because I don't want to feel like I'm ignoring that part or intentionally not talking about that part, because it's a big part of the book. So
I mean, the subtitle for Song of Songs is the sexy Bible, and it really is, though. I mean, like, there's definitely bits of the Bible that are sexual and threatening and icky and awful. I'm looking at you, Ezekiel. But there are also bits of it that we just forget are, I mean, people have sex with each other and they like it, right? And it's like, somehow, do we blame it on the Puritans? Do we blame it earlier than that? I don't even know. But somehow, particularly in 20th and 21st century America, we have this really, I don't know, I want to call it complex. It is complex relationship to sex, but it presents itself as like complete abstinence, sex doesn't exist. and it's like the Madonna whore thing, right? Like we have this over sexualized advertisement and whatever, and then the assumption is, well, it's over sexualized, therefore it's bad. Not necessarily. I mean, sex sells things because we like it. Sex is a good thing. It was given to us in creation. This is God, as Rob Bell says in his Everything is Spiritual video, like God made things that could make more things. That's so cool, right? And how do we make more things? I mean, most of us are not asexual reproducers. We have this pleasure instinct, right?
Yeah.
And so I appreciate the parts of the Bible that at least refer to that, reflect on that. I mean, Song of Songs is pretty in your face about it. They enjoy, the two of them enjoy each other's bodies. And there's a bit where she is pretty obviously enjoying her own body, separate from him. But we somehow have this understanding of Scripture as down on sex. Sex is bad. It's only for procreation. You're not supposed to enjoy it. And that's just so false. That's not what it is. Mm-hmm. And so I appreciate that you bring up Ruth as an example of that, because you're right. Like it does get kind of this, well, I said in the book, sort of the sepia toned kind of, isn't it lovely that they got married and, had a baby, and we don't think about like, how did they get that baby?
Yeah. And that she's,
and the text is pretty straightforward about how they got that baby.
Yeah. And she's the seducer in that book. I mean,
and she's the seductress in that moment. But I was thinking as you were saying that about the widows chapter, because that's not really what that chapter is about. But at the beginning of it, I talk about my friends who have this sort of physical intimacy. It's just that my friend put her hand on her husband's back, and I was thinking about how she knows where all the moles on his body are, and how he's sore after he's run a marathon and things like that, and how my husband doesn't run marathons, but how I have similar experience of his body and he of mine. And that's how couples are, right?
Yeah.
Even like there's the pleasure of the sex, but like I do a lot of premarital counseling with not even young couples, just new couples, and like that's one of the things we talk about is how the sort of the shock, the excitement, the giddiness, and sort of the lots of sex part of the early stages of a relationship is beautiful and wonderful, and it's amazing. And it's not that you don't have sex when you're an old married couple. Forget all those stupid comedies on TV about how couples never have sex. It becomes something different. There's an intimacy, and that's what I'm referring to in the widows chapter. Like that's one of the reasons why we miss our partner so much when they die.
Yeah.
There's like the physical pleasure of sex, but there's also like what is that sex about? It's about this deep, deep connection that is bigger than the two of you. And that's why we have a strain of theology that's about Jesus being the bridegroom and us being the bride.
Mm-hmm.
It's because we see couples doing that and we say that's like our relationship with God, is that deep, deep intimacy, and how beautiful that is. And even though it's kind of weird, like that's called bridal mysticism. I mean, there's a thin line between spiritual ecstasy and sexual ecstasy.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the Madonna video, Like a Prayer. Like literally that's what she's doing. And maybe that's weird, but it's also very real. Yeah. And I think we do a disservice to ourselves as a whole, to our young people when we don't want to talk about sex with them, to each other in sort of coupled relationships, to single people when we don't talk about sex in church. It's a huge part of everybody's lives. And when I say, you may have asexual people listening to this podcast. Hi, ace people. Nice to see you. It's a big part of your life because everybody else around you is having sex. You may not be.
Yeah.
The point is that this is a big part of sort of the human experience. And if we ignore it or if we just shame it, that's not helpful.
Right. Yeah.
So that's my rant or riff on that.
It's great because it's present. It's present throughout your book because it's present throughout human experience.
Yeah.
And And again, I'm going to keep coming back to this sort of calling you the way you write. It's like full fledged. Like these people are people through and through. They're not thin characters, and that's part of what makes them whole. Like, is that this is not shunted. This is not categorized to like this little small part of them. It's it's a huge part of them. So why not just say it like it is? Like,
right, for sure.
Yeah. Well, man, I'm really bad at segues tonight. So when you hear this later, you'll probably hear that there's a few musical interludes.
That's fine.
But I try to pick good music, so I'm sure I'll pick some great like lady rockers to put in there and everything too.
My baby loves me, I'm so happy. Happy makes me a money girl. Took my money and bought a TV.
This is going to probably be another hard segue, just because your book is based on all these sort of disparate characters, but
yeah,
I mean,
sure.
Again, you've got all these wonderful stories. I want to talk about maybe one or two more, and then the other one that I have a lot of underlines in the Woman at the Well, and sort of going back to our talk about Episcopalianism and the fan club part at the beginning of the episode of our talk here. One of the things that I recently participated in was this like Lent-based small group, and what it was is it was a small group where we'd read the next week's lectionary, and one of the things that came up in Lent was this passage of the Woman at the Well, and so we talked a lot about it, and so it's sort of been in my head for the last few months.
Yeah.
And it's really great. Just first of all, that you emphasize that the longest theological discussion in the Gospels is between Jesus and this woman, which I'd known it was a long passage, and actually in the lectionary, it like basically states most of it. I mean, it's a long passage that I think 50 or some verses that they keep almost all of it, if not all of it.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I think is downplayed a lot, is because we haven't really talked about the Gospels yet and the women in the New Testament yet, just because there's so much to talk about.
Right, yeah, there is.
But I think one of the things about Jesus, and one of the ways he was revolutionary, is that his behavior was by and large egalitarian. Like the women were the first witness of the resurrection. He elevated women in pretty much every circumstance he could. I'm sure you could slice and dice a few of his interactions. He sort of talks down. Sometimes you read and look, it sounds like he's talking down to some women at times. Yeah. But overall, that's one of the things that he does.
He talks down to his disciples sometimes too.
Oh yeah, yeah. He's like, why the hell don't you get this? How many times do I have to go through
this?
Guys. So, yeah. I don't know if you listen to the podcast Sunday School Dropouts.
No.
It's like the whole thing. I've had the hosts on the show, but it's an ex-Christian and a non-believing sort of Jew. That's their tagline, and they're reading through the Bible.
Nice.
So it's a boyfriend girlfriend, and the girlfriend. I talk with her on Twitter all the time, and I'm blanking on her name. I'm sorry.
She's great though.
She is great. She calls it sarcastic Jesus. Oh, Lauren O'Neill.
Yeah.
Lauren O'Neill. Sarcastic Jesus. That's what she calls it. Totally. But he's not in this passage though. Sorry for all that tangent.
No.
I really like what you have to say about. It's important to admit our not knowing what the hell is going on when we're talking about Jesus. God's not some wilting flower we push back because we care about the relationship enough to understand it and make it better. And I really like that, especially in this chapter, because that's clearly what she does. This woman doesn't really take any guff. Like, she's just like, yeah. So it's, since we haven't talked about the New Testament at all, let's talk about this a little bit and this interaction.
She's fantastic. There's so many interpretations of this story because there's so much to it, right? There's a lot of meat in this one story. And so lots of commentators have lots of different things to say about it. And I'm not really saying any of them are wrong. It's just that as you were saying, sort of this idea of putting meat on the people and having them be actual people, even though, spoilers, probably a lot of these folks didn't actually exist. I'm not talking about Jesus here. I'm talking about, whatever. Let's not talk about that right now. The point is, did the woman at the well actually exist? I don't know.
I don't
but that's
think,
not the point.
Yeah,
like
putting literalism.
Right. I mean, putting the meat on her bones and saying she at the very least stands in for somebody, for us.
Yeah.
She doesn't have to be a metaphor for all the different foreign alliances that Israel has made over the years, right? Okay, that's absolutely one interpretation, and there's certainly, I think it was the Middle Ages, though I could be making that up. There was an era of the church in which the idea was that one interprets Scripture through multiple lenses simultaneously. So you have the layer of literalism, for sure. I mean, here's the story. What does the story say? But then that's not where you stop. Then there's the next level down, which is sort of allegory. And then there's another, and there's 5 different levels or something. Mm-hmm. So it's not bad to look at it that way, right? There's some truth that can be found in reading it that way. But the text doesn't care about the number of her husbands. Yeah. He says, bring your husband. She says, I don't have one. He says, that's true. You don't have one. You had 5 husbands, and the one you have now isn't your own. So there's this little back and forth about it. The text doesn't care in the sense that there is nothing made of that. We don't know what he's referring to. She doesn't clarify it. She's like, oh, you're right. Listen, I can tell there's something going on with you. I have some questions. And it immediately skims into that. And many interpreters sort of have this, and I read a lot of commentaries. I mean, I already read them before, but I read them in preparation for writing this. And so many of them have this sort of condescending attitude towards her. She could not possibly have understood what he was saying when he talks about living water. She could not really understand what he meant about worshiping in spirit and truth. She could not really get it because she's just a woman. Very few of them actually say because she's just a woman. But that's what they mean. How could she have understood this? She clearly did. She's sitting there talking to him. She was there and she gets oh, yeah. I guess my point is it's important in all situations, like we were talking about before, to ask what else could this mean, right? So the complexity of the interpretation of the story is important. Absolutely. Set that aside for just a moment and say, also, we don't have to interpret away her agency here. He says, give me some water. She says, what'd she say? You don't have a bucket. So I can't remember exactly how it goes. And he's like, oh, no. He says, I'll give you living water. And she says, sir, you don't have a bucket. And we're meant to understand that she's totally stupid. And it's oh, you don't have a bucket. How can you give me the water? But that's not what she says. And he says, oh, I have this living water that you'll never be thirsty again. And she's like, oh, okay. Why can't we take her seriously and say, she got it? Yeah. All right. Give me this living water. I'm ready. Let's go. It frustrates me that the sort of go-to is she couldn't possibly understand. When she has the longest conversation and really the most theologically complex conversation that he has, maybe barring, say, Pilate, but I think Pilate was just being a dick. So that one's up for interpretation.
The dick interpretation.
Yeah. But, what is truth? Like, he doesn't care. He's the dude with the privilege. He's having an interesting intellectual conversation with somebody who's going to die the next day, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway. So yeah, I mean, I think most, if not all, these women, I will say all of these women, have agency. We don't tend to read their stories that way. Maybe because even now in 2017, we don't really think women have agency, or maybe it's not gendered. Maybe just we don't think that someone other than us has agency. I know what I'm doing, and I'm right because my view on the world is accurate, but you don't. Clearly she doesn't. Clearly that guy doesn't. I'm being a little bit grumpy here about this. But it has to do with what we were talking about earlier. I don't remember if we were recording or if it was before the conversation started, but just about this idea of how important it is to listen to each other and take each other seriously. We talked about that.
Yeah.
To take the other person's story seriously, that in fact is their experience.
Right.
Instead of jumping in to say, no, that's not really what happened. You must have misinterpreted that. That's not what they meant.
Yeah.
Why not take her seriously? Yeah, she knew what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And she went and told other people about it.
Yeah. She got it.
Yeah.
Way faster than the dudes he surrounded himself with did. Which doesn't make women better. Like, I really want to be clear about this. I have a handful of comments on the book trailer that's posted on Facebook. It's got a ton of views, but there's a handful of comments. First of all, I find it very interesting that most of the likes on it are from women. Mm-hmm. And most of the comments are from men and are negative. And I don't think that means men are bad and women are good or anything. Like, I don't want to, it's not helpful to make it that simplistic. I think it's interesting that allowing these women to have agency and allowing their stories to be feels threatening.
Yeah.
To some folks, right? And probably across gender. As I've said sort of sarcastically in other podcasts, like, men are people too. This is for everyone. It literally is for everyone, right? This is not just for your women's book group.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I know you. I know you know that.
Oh, no. I know. But I'm even saying, like, I recommend this to anyone, regardless of gender. Like,
I mean, I have a good friend.
I'm totally with you.
I have a good friend who works at another church in town, and we got together. Gosh, when was this? Like January, I think. I don't remember. We got together to have a drink. He wanted to pick my brain because he was leading a men's retreat, and he had decided that the men's retreat was going to be about feminism, why men need feminism. And he had a ton of people signed up. It was going to be great. I think it did go well. I forgot to follow up with him now I think about it. But we were talking about this idea that, like, feminism, or even if that word is difficult for you, just like empowering and listening to the stories of women is not just for women. It is for everyone, because we are all people. And as I talk about in the introduction, for whatever reason over the centuries, we have this sense that women's stories are for women in Scripture, and the men's stories are universal. What do we say when we talk about the God of Israel? God of Israel is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What about Sarah and Rachel and Rebecca and Leah? Like, they were there.
Right. Right.
It wouldn't have happened without them.
Yeah.
Right. At the very least, it wouldn't have happened without them. And like, well, those are the big name stories. Like, those are the guys who said the words, did the things. Well, those are the stories we have. Right. Just the point being, it was a long way to describe that. The point being that I am a woman, so maybe I'm biased. I don't think I am. These stories are in fact universal.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You personally may not go through childbirth, but you do understand the idea of creation. You understand the idea of new life. You understand the idea of loss and of loneliness, of justice, of misery. Like, these are all concepts that we all get.
Right. Yeah. I think, I think that is, it's absolutely valid. And I think it's valid to speaking to other white men like me.
Mm-hmm.
It's valid for other people to be frustrated that within like our moment in history, that like the white male experience is the one that's expressed and intended to be universal. Like, I mean, if you just look back from the beginning, if you could go back forever, but even if you just wanted to look at television and movies from the 50s to now, like, let's just look at that snapshot. I mean, it's primarily white men in leads. And that is why things like representation are so important to so many people, because it's not about checking a box, because to a white person, they might see it as checking a box, but it's about making those stories as universal as every other story.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely valid.
I was just going to say, in the Mary chapter, I talk about the Magnificat, and that to people in power, whoever that is, to the people with the privilege, equality looks like a threat.
Right.
It looks like losing something. And yeah.
Yeah, and
it's hard.
Yeah, to bring back another like comic book example, like it's why something like Wonder Woman is so freaking amazing. Like,
so good.
I just saw it today, so I'm like super high on it. But like that,
I mean, we could talk about the myth of redemptive violence and how problematic that is, particularly in Wonder Woman's story. However, it's an amazing movie. Everyone should go see.
Yes, yeah. She's talk about a complicated character. She is a warrior and a missionary of peace. Like,
yes, exactly,
like an ambassador of peace. Like, that's woven into her DNA as a character, which is super interesting. And it's a universal story. But to your point, it's been one that's been sidelined for being supposedly just for women. But that's why things like upcoming stories, things like Black Panther, all sorts of things like that, those things of representation are also the validation of the universality of their stories, and also the validation of a particular story.
Yeah,
like,
right.
That a particular story is just as valuable as one that's not like Captain America, Superman, Batman, like all these white guys running around in their underwear. Like, let somebody else run around in their underwear. Like, it's fun, right? So, anyways,
I will not speak to that.
That's spandex, whatever it is.
Whatever.
I'm just making a joke. But yeah, I think your comment about this sort of response on your book trailer is damning and also not surprising, and that makes it sad. Like, and that's where we need to keep acknowledging people as people. So
right.
So yeah, and I think your book is just a wonderful example of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think it's a wonderful example of people doing their best, and people interacting with God and whatever they understand to be God, and enlightening and entertaining in great, like, just human ways. Like, it's quintessential human. And I think that's what's sort of great about what you've discovered and unearthed again for people in the script. People that are in the scriptures, which it's not people have a complicated relationship with the Bible, rightfully so. But this is a great way to figure out why these stories have been so sustainable, why they've had legs for so long. So yeah, I just really want to thank you for coming and onto the show and talking.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Where can people find you online? Or elsewhere? I want to make sure you can plug your stuff. Tell us where you can buy your book, all of that.
Online or elsewhere. Well, I live in Cincinnati. Please don't stalk me. I won't tell you where. It's a big city. Online, you can find me at fierceasswomen.com. Is my website, and it has all the other various contact information there. But the trailer is on Facebook. I have an author page that is Alice Connor, not to be confused with my personal page, which is also Alice Connor, which is a little confusing. Do find the author page. And I have a Twitter feed, Pastor Alice. My Pinterest board that I used for inspiration for the book is on that website as well.
Oh, cool.
It's pretty cool. There's some really amazing art out there of women in the Bible, but also I pulled all kinds of other things that just were inspiring to me about those women.
We didn't even mention the illustrations in the book. The illustrations are amazing.
Thank you. The illustrations are amazing. My husband did them. He is fantastic.
They're great.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, he's pretty great about it. He was a team player when I asked him to do it. He got a little grumpy with me partway through, but we persisted. Nevertheless, we persisted.
Great. Well, Alice, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.